And cut.
Sonic Forces actually has 4 different styles of gameplay at various sections of the game. There's Modern Sonic, whose gameplay sports the returning boost formula from Unleashed and colors. Classic Sonic's gameplay is strictly 2D style platforming, much how we controlled in Generations. Then there's your Avatar, who doesn't have the boost ability, but makes up for this with technology and weaponry. And then there are stages where you and Sonic will team up together, giving you access to both characters' abilities simultaneously. Shadow is also a playable character this time around, and each character has their own unique power. As I mentioned before, Sonic has his boost function, which sends him speeding through levels at dizzying speeds. This is also how Shadow's gameplay turns out. Classic Sonic has his spin dash, obviously, but now he is also rocking the new drop dash ability from Sonic Mania, and more on that later. And as also mentioned before, your avatar has tech and weapons to their advantage. And I say there, because the avatar is supposed to represent you, the player, and that can mean male or female depending on your gender. They have a grappling hook that can be used to cling to objects in certain sections of the stage, and you can also target enemies with it to perform a makeshift homing attack. But the big selling point for Avatar characters are the weapons at your disposal. Called Wispins, these use all the different Wisp powers that you will unlock as you progress throughout the stage. I initially stuck with the Flamethrower and Lightning Whip as they kept the pace going for me. Other weapons, such as the drill or shotgun, just felt jarring to use. When Not a Hero was first announced, a lot of people speculated on whether or not this was even the real Chris. The title Not a Hero suggests something sinister, but ultimately felt very out of place in the final product as Chris ultimately saves everyone. And good God, does Chris look horrible here. How do we go from this to this? Lucas is still an obnoxious prick that really doesn't need to be here. His surprising intellect and cunning are cool, but continues to feel shoehorned in. There is an attempt at a backstory as to why he's here, but it just feels like it was thrown in to justify his existence. Combat and gameplay feel off because they used the same stiff controls from the main game, which makes sense for Ethan, because it limits the player and creates extra tension, a la the way tank controls did for the original Resident Evil. However, it's long been established that Chris is a warrior, and using the control scheme tailored for the slow-paced horror of the main game here, where the character is more combat-oriented, can really lead to some janky gameplay at times. And there are some almost pointless game mechanics here that sound great in theory, but aren't fleshed out or utilized to their fullest potential. And one final gripe I have with this DLC is that it is short. Too short. It only clocks in at around 2 hours long, and the strange thing is that it felt like the story was trying to tell me more, but Capcom wouldn't let it. So while Capcom was having fun making us wait until Not a Hero, They were also busy developing another DLC to drop along with it. Unlike Not a Hero, however, nobody had any idea what this other DLC was at the time. It was believed that we would get an action-packed experience with one piece of content, while the other would be more horror-focused and possibly not even take place in the same area. Then as we got closer to its release, we found out that it would be called End of Zoe, and that it would tell the story of what happened to her after she got left behind in the main game, and that a man named Joe would be involved in the plot. It's worth noting that upon release, Not a Hero was free DLC, while End of Zoe was not. Turns out that we play as Joe, and the game starts off with him strolling through the swamp when he happens upon two highly trained and fully armed soldiers of Blue Umbrella that he proceeds to beat the living hell out of using only his fists. He then comes upon the body of Zoe, who he seems to know and even calls family. You see, Joe is actually Joe Baker, and is the brother of Jack Baker, you know, the guy who gave you so much shit in the first half of the main game. He actually manages to capture one of the soldiers and demands to know why they are there and what they did to Zoe, as he believes they are the bad guys. And if this was any other Resident Evil title, he would be right. Anywho, the soldier tells him that they are there to help and that Zoe needs a cure for her infection, which is the basis of the whole story from here on out, except for this one unusually strong molded that turns out to be Jack, even though we already killed him, who tries to kill Joe, but ultimately fails, which leads to a final showdown between brothers. Jack is killed again, Chris shows up to the rescue, Joe tells Zoe her family still loves her, and Zoe talks to